today's Lentil. We are going to spend a few moments together today just thinking about this passage in the book of Matthew chapter 26 verses 31 to 35 where Jesus predicts that Peter is going to deny him. Now before we do that, I wonder how well you think you know yourself. How well you think you know the choices that you would make in any given situation or circumstance. Barry and I have been married for almost 20 years, and in those 20 years we have really come to know one another quite well. We know the things that we like and the things that we don't. We know the things that we would choose and the things that we wouldn't. And we often, when we go out for a meal together, we like to predict what the other one will choose from the menu. And mostly we get that right. We know exactly what we would like most from that menu, exactly what we're going to choose on that day. But sometimes, every now and again, one of us will pick something that is unexpected and surprise the other person. I wonder if you've ever surprised yourself. I wonder if you've ever found that you've really enjoyed something that you thought you wouldn't, or you've acted in a way that you never thought you would. Have you ever surprised yourself? How well do you know yourself? Now, Peter in this passage thinks he knows himself really quite well, but we find that Jesus knows him even better. Let's read this together. Then Jesus told them, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you to Galilee." Peter replied, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." "Truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "this very night before the cock crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the other disciples said the same. Peter thinks he knows himself. He thinks he knows the choices he would make. He thinks he knows the strength of his faith and belief and trust in Jesus. But you see, after this, after the crucifixion, Peter 3 times goes on to deny Jesus. When they come to him and say, "Weren't you with Jesus? Don't you know this Jesus?" 3 times he says, having declared the strength of his faith before the crucifixion, just after 3 times, "No, I never knew him. I was not with him." You see, Peter thought that he knew himself. He thought he knew the choices he would make and the strength of his faith. After all, Peter was one of the first to leave his nets to follow Jesus. Peter, when called by Jesus, left everything behind in order to follow after this teacher, to discover this new teaching that he was bringing and to follow after this man. After all, Peter was the one to take Jesus on his word and walk out on the water when all of the other disciples remained in the boat. Jesus was the one that said, "Master, call to me and I will come to you on the water." Peter is the one that stepped out in faith when all else remained. He walked on the water, the only one of the disciples to ever experience by faith what it was to walk on water. After all, Peter is the one who first calls Jesus the Christ. He is the first to dare to allow who Jesus was pass his lips. After all, Peter was the one who, when everyone else was leaving, turns to Jesus, looks him in the eye and says, "Master, where else would we go? I'm never leaving you. Where else would we go? You alone have the words of eternal life." Friends, it is the force of Peter's conviction that has led him for those 3 years to be a committed follower of Jesus, to be the first out of the boat, to be the first to leave his nets, to be the first to call him the Christ, to be the first to remain when others chose to leave. Peter, the least likely of all of the disciples to deny Jesus, and yet he surprised himself. Peter thought he knew himself, but Jesus knew him better. When Jesus is crucified 3 times, then Peter goes on to deny him. I wonder why he chose to deny Jesus in those moments. I wonder if it was the horror of what he had witnessed. I wondered if he wanted to disassociate himself with the horror that had taken place on the cross. Maybe he was left after that crucifixion so utterly disappointed, so utterly bereaved of this man, that he couldn't bring himself to say that he knew him. Maybe he was so disappointed in himself. Maybe the fact that Christ had been crucified and Peter had failed to effectively intervene in any way. Maybe he blamed himself and didn't want anyone to know that he was the one who hadn't intervened. He was the one who hadn't stopped this thing from happening. And so maybe he didn't want to associate. Maybe it was fear that drove him in that moment to deny Jesus. Maybe he was simply just lost, disappointed, hopeless, living in despair. Whatever it was, we will never truly know. Only Jesus and Peter truly know the reason he denies Jesus. And yet in that moment, Peter surprises himself. But friends, he didn't surprise Christ. Peter's falling at that hurdle, Peter's denial of faith was not a surprise to Jesus, because he had predicted it. He is the knower of the hearts of men and women, and he had predicted it already. And you see, Jesus had already made a plan. He knew this hurdle was coming. He knew that Peter was going to fall, and he had made a plan to restore Peter. And in the end, Jesus says, upon this rock, Peter, upon you I will build my church. He takes his name, Simon the Reed, and calls him Peter the Rock. Jesus has made a plan to pick him up, put him on his feet, and set him off on this journey of faith again. And friends, each one of us is known by Christ today better than we know ourselves. And Christ goes ahead of us. The Christian journey is a race which must be run, the Bible teaches us, with perseverance. Sometimes along that journey we trip and fall. Friends, it isn't the tripping and falling that counts us out of that journey. It is the staying down and looking at the ground and refusing to get up again that counts us out. It is when we give up and count ourselves out. Because Jesus has gone ahead and he has made a way for us, friends. And when we hit those hurdles, when we get it wrong, when we make a mess, when the world comes crumbling down around us, Christ is ready to pick us up, to set us on our feet, and to set us going on that race again. So friends, whatever else we do, whatever we are faced with, whatever surprising actions or words or choices that come from us, that perhaps leave us feeling disappointed with ourselves, disappointed with God, feeling like we have failed, Christ has made a way. You see, whatever we do, it does not surprise God. None of our actions, none of our words will ever surprise him. He has gone ahead of us. He has made a way, and he is ready today to pick us up again, to put us on our feet and set us back on that race. There is forgiveness and there is restoration, because Jesus knows us better than we know ourselves.